3-2 with the bases loaded. And Fernandez sends one deep to left field. Tony Fernandez empties the bases.
Toronto Blue Jays fans are remembering a franchise legend. The team's former star shortstop, Tony Fernandez, has died at the age of 57. He won a World Series title with the Blue Jays in 1993 and holds several franchise records. Fernandez was hospitalized earlier this year due to complications from a kidney disease. He was taken off life support after suffering a stroke. So for more on the life and legacy of Tony Fernandez, we've invited Gare Joyce onto the program. He's a feature writer for Sportsnet who covered the Blue Jays extensively during Fernandez's career. Gare is with us in studio. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
I want to talk about Fernandez, his skill, and what he meant to the game. But first, I actually want to talk about your relationship with him, because at the time you started interviewing him, maybe your Spanish wasn't the best, and certainly his English wasn't the greatest. So I'm wondering what it was like for you two to have conversations together.
I asked questions in Spanish and he answered them in English. He was fresh off of his first full season with the Jays when I met him. This was, I think, November, December 85. And, he struck me at first as a pretty serious-minded, dour character. But what I didn't realize was that his mom was sick with the very condition that claimed him this week.
So you think back to the first moments,
Yeah.
There was already an inkling of how devastating this health concern can be. And you say that initially you found him to be dour. Did that perspective change over time?
He was still a very serious-minded fellow when it came to the game. He worked out an incredible amount. I could claim pretty categorically that nobody put in more time, more hours, more effort than he did. And he was really on the track for a Hall of Fame career until injuries sort of chipped away at his skill.
Why do you think he was so driven and so hardworking?
That's a tough one to plumb. I do think that at 15 or 16, he had a pretty serious knee condition, so he almost lost the game then. And the Jays scout in the Dominican, Epi Guerrero, paid for the surgery to remove bone chips in his knees. Those bone chips had scared off all other scouts, all other major league teams from signing him. So I think part of it was the prospect that he actually lived with the idea that he wasn't going to be able to play. And now he was going to make the most of it. The other thing is where he grew up right beside the baseball stadium in San Pedro de Macorís. Very, very humble circumstances. Baseball is the way to get out of those humble circumstances there. There aren't a lot of options. The book that I wrote about the Dominican Republic way back I called it The Only Ticket Off the Island. And really, baseball was the only ticket off the island for Tony Fernandez and a generation of ball players.
And he got that ticket. Despite all the obstacles, he made it. He made it to the Blue Jays.
He punched that ticket.
He did, and he made it to the World Series. So now let's talk about, once he got there, what made him so special, and what's the legacy that he's going to leave behind?
And just looking back on it, and I didn't realize it until I had to put together this tribute to Tony. He was a great player at his peak, but even after injury it had sort of brought his game back to earth somewhat, he was still an absolute tiger in the postseason. Like sports writers and analysts don't like to talk about clutch. They think that that's sort of passé. But he really raised his already great game to another level in the postseason. He didn't win an MVP with the Jays team in '93. He made a strong case for it. And at later stops along the way, he played for the Yankees and the Indians. he was a very dynamic player, even late in his career in the postseason. Probably something that won't get remembered so much here today, but it was a key thing that wasn't lost on people in baseball and on his teammates.
You know, during the commercial, you mentioned that there's almost a sense of being robbed because he's gone so young, 57. And, you know, forgive me if I'm wrong, but it feels like you're hurting. How are you feeling about this today?
It's a hard one. You know, when we met, Tony was 23. I was 29, I guess. And, you know, I felt like I was talking to someone my own age, as much as I was talking to someone with almost nothing culturally in common. You know, I felt pretty close to him. The first night that I spoke to him, I was outside the stadium at midnight or something like that, and I was trying to hail a cab, which in Santa Domingo, there's no guarantee. And he pulled up in some old wreck with like a perforated muffler, and he's, you know, he said, "Hop in, I'll give you a drive," slammed the door, like it was even sort of a rickety door. You know, for a ball player to give you a ride home from the hotel, that was something. But it was also that the major league life hadn't quite touched him yet. That he did have an old wreck as a car. I went to they showed me where his family home was in San Pedro. Still very humble circumstances where his siblings were. I saw him before. I saw him as he was an emerging great, not after he had been affected by greatness. And he would have been affected by all that less than almost anybody.
Well, Garrett, I thank you so much for sharing your professional insights and for your personal stories. I'm really sorry for your loss.
Okay, well, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Garrett Joyce is a feature writer with Sportsnet.